Good morning. This is week 5 of the outline of British art, and a year has passed, so I will be recycling some of the materials I uploaded last year. Good news is that technology has improved, or at least my understanding and skill at uploading stuff has improved, I hope. For once, I will be adding all the illustrations to the videos that were made last year, and I will be also adding some more videos. Last year everybody thought it wouldn't last long, and we would be back within a few weeks, and everything was more or less improvised. Now we know that the whole semester will be online, and let's just see. So if you go through the PowerPoint presentation on Moodle, again you'll see I covered much of the plan for week 5 last year. I just wanted to add a few things now that we have the opportunity, so we can use the live meeting just to discuss and add up and basically broaden our knowledge and understanding of the 18th century painting, and especially the art of William Hogarth. But before I move back to Hogarth and his cycles, a few more painters, British painters, English, Scottish. In the 18th century, we really start having native British artists. Of course, the money is first and foremost in the portraiture. So if you could secure a royal commission like the Scottish portrait painter Alan Ramsay, we have 2 portraits by him here showing King George III and his wife Queen Charlotte, with 2 of their 15 children. Both these children are boys. Little boys and girls were dressed in almost identical clothes in the 18th century. We'll talk about it next week. There will be a lot more of children's portraits. It's just a few let's say early ones, or to indicate. So King George III, the third of the line of Georges from the Hanoverian dynasty, the grandson of George II. His father died before his grandfather, so he took the throne very young after the death of his grandfather, and he stayed on the throne for 60 years. This is still the 3rd longest reign in the history of Britain. However, towards the end of his life, George III became quite ill with what was quite famously called madness. So he had bouts of some sort of psychiatric disorder. There has been discussions like what was exactly wrong with him. But this was the end of his life. For most of it, he was quite successful, with perhaps one spectacular blunder of losing the American colonies. He was also another monarch, as you remember, probably from the Stuarts period, King Charles I, who was praised as a good father and husband. The same happens here with George III. He was, according to some historians, the first British monarch not to have a mistress. He had only legitimate children with his German wife, German Princess Charlotte. And they are sometimes shown, especially she is, as a good mother. This is something quite symptomatic for the 18th century, something that we will return to next week. There are also other native British artists beginning their successful careers, and we have two names here, Joseph Highmore and Bartholomew Dandridge. Joseph Highmore, here we have a portrait of Mr. Oldham and his friends. We can assume by the look of the sitters they are from the middle class, or to use the 18th century term, the middling sort. People who are not landowners, but who are professionals, who live in cities increasingly, who will be very enriched by the Industrial Revolution. This is something quite important for the 18th century as well. So the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the philosophy of enlightenment, the philosophy of individualism. So we have a lot of interest also coming from the middle sections of the society to have their likenesses painted. So this is a very good time to be a portrait painter. So we have another one, The Craven Children by Bartholomew Dandridge. So a group portrait of three children of what you might expect are quite a wealthy family. The children are presented as very well dressed in some sort of miniature versions of adult clothes. So the girl looks like a little lady, the boy looks like a perfect little gentleman, smartly dressed, even with some sort of toy sword as a decoration, but also mark of high status. I have showed you quite a few portraits by Hogarth, including his famous self-portrait with his favorite dog, the pug dog, but there is one I missed, and it's also a portrait of a group of children from one family, the Graham family. So it's called the Graham children. 4 children, 2 girls, a boy and a baby, and you know now that little toddlers wearing dresses not necessarily have to be boys. So we have this baby in baby clothes, and then the 2 sisters and the brother. And especially if you compare it with, let's say, Dandridge's, the Craven children, these children are much more alive. They are much more engaged. You can see some sort of interaction and perhaps emotions, the brotherly, sisterly love between these children. They look like they care for each other, they play together, they have very lively, smiling facial expressions. One of the girls is holding the hand of the baby, another girl is dancing, and the little brother is playing a musical instrument. But also, and this is something that is very typical for Hogarth's art in general, there are symbolic elements, there are meaningful details in the painting that will draw the attention to sometimes quite dark things. So Hogarth would not be Hogarth if he did not include animals as some sort of commentary to the scene presented in the painting. So if you look close, we have a bird cage with a bird. This was quite a fashionable thing to have caged birds in the homes of the upper class, the middle class, and this is one way of having a little bit of nature at home. There is also a cat, and the cat is looking at the bird, probably with some malicious intent, probably plotting or at least dreaming how he could catch the bird and eat it. So we have the danger, we have the secluded bird, like the children who are secluded in their family home, but there is always danger lurking and endangering these children. And indeed, we know it's not evident from the painting, although there are quite a lot of ominous symbols, like there is a clock with the figure of a reaper, almost like the Grim Reaper, so possibly a symbol of death. And we know that the youngest baby died before the family portrait was complete. So what started as a kind of joyful family portrait became really a commemoration of the youngest child in the family who died, because little children died like flies in the 18th century. The state of medicine was quite, I would say, backward. The medical profession and even the knowledge of what caused diseases was very weak. They didn't have the microscopes even. They didn't have the vast majority of modern cures. So childhood was a very dangerous time, and practically every family, regardless of their social status, had to bear a loss of a child. In the 18th century, what starts to change is actually that people are no longer so afraid to invest emotionally at all in their relationships with their small children. Before that, children feature very rarely in the portraiture because they were so much likely to die, and people didn't want to suffer by looking at the sad memento of a life that ended so quickly. In the 18th century, and especially in the second half of the century, with the philosophies of Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the return to nature, this is something that we will talk about next week. We have the celebration of life, however fleeting, the celebration of family, of love, of children. So what we have are more and more such portraits, and I would say William Hogarth, with his deep humanism, which you could also see in his paintings, in his portraits of poor people, the shrimp seller, his household servants. He finds individualism, he finds uniqueness, beauty and charm in the places that many other artists did not. So that's the first thing. And what else I would like to talk with you is those cycles, the famous cycles of paintings and then engravings that really made the name and became a kind of specialty of William Hogarth. So he would paint like a picture story, almost like a graphic novel, first in the form of oil paintings, and if they were successful, if many people came to the exhibition to see them, and they were very successful, also because they told the story of contemporary life. Then, very often, Hogarth would prepare engravings, lithographs, and sell these cycles of images in multiple copies more cheaply, so you could actually buy such a set to have at home, like a book, like an illustrated book. They were sometimes accompanied by written text, so these were like illustrations to a story. And these stories were always cautionary tales. Cautionary tales about failure in life. So stories with some humor, of course, telling people how not to behave. So let's look at the first one, A Harlot's Progress. 6 engravings. The original oil paintings did not survive. They were destroyed somewhere in a fire, probably. So 1733, A Harlot's Progress. A harlot is an old word for a sex worker, for a prostitute, and this is the main heroine, an innocent girl from the country called Moll Hackabout. This is her name, and she comes to London to find employment. She's naive, she is dressed in white, she's beautiful, fresh-faced. She's like a goose, really, and one of the things that she brings from the country is a dead goose, probably a present for somebody who offered her a job or some relatives in the city. So we have Moll arriving in London, and she's full of hope. She comes, as you can see, in a wagon full of young girls like that. There are some indications that she has a skill as a seamstress. She wants to be a dressmaker, perhaps. Actually, what I would like you to do is to find good quality copies, or even go to a Wikipedia page for those cycles. Look at these images in close-up and try to find some more details. I will not be describing all the details, there are just too many of them, and we'll have something to discuss during the live meet. So she comes to London, and rather than finding a decent employment as a seamstress or a domestic servant, she's approached by a notorious brothel keeper. So this woman with very characteristic black soles on her face, which always in Hogarth's work indicates syphilis, a very serious, very dangerous disease. This woman is actually based on a real person, a real notorious brothel keeper named Elizabeth Needham, who promises to employ Moll, but she lures her into prostitution. This is what will happen, and like this unfortunate goose, this poor girl will pay dearly for her naivety. So in the next installment, in the next episode, Moll is a kept woman. She's a mistress. She's not a common prostitute. She has just one client, a man who pays for her lodging. She is quite successful and pretty. We can assume from several details in the engraving that the sponsor is a wealthy Jewish merchant. So she has all the fashionable stuff. A fashionable lodging, a pet monkey. Yes, we have another animal. So a pet monkey. Moll is herself like a pet monkey, an amusing little animal to entertain the man. She employs, or her sponsor, her master, employs young black-skinned servant. This was the fashionable thing to do in the 18th century, to have exotic-looking servants. She also has a housemaid, and if you look close, the housemaid is leading away a younger and more handsome lover, probably not as rich, while Moll herself is distracting the merchant by overturning a little table with a tea set. So we see that she is well accustomed into the life of vice. She's not faithful to her merchant, to her sponsor. She has illicit affairs, and of course this will contribute to her downfall. So in plate 3, she is a common prostitute. She was downgraded. She probably was abandoned by the rich merchant. She now lives in a poorer room, just one room with the bed and everything. She has another servant, an older, uglier, and also pox infected, so syphilis infected woman. And we can notice some indication of the fact that she is now a common prostitute, accepting anyone who's willing to pay for her services. There is a cat, a female cat, on the floor right next to Moll, and she is in a very suggestive sexual pose. So of course this is your Hogarth humor, and just as Moll is starting her day and the servant is pouring her some milk, probably, to a little jug to add to her tea. The bailiffs, so the armed guardsmen, come to arrest her, probably for theft, or maybe for prostitution, or maybe for something else. There are some indications in the room that she was a lover of a criminal, so maybe she is implicated in some of his crimes. In plate 4, Moll is in Bridewell prison. This was the female prison, and of course prisoners had to work, so she is shown working. She's actually beating the hemp for ropes, perhaps ropes that will be used to hang more serious criminals. There are more women in a situation similar to hers. There are some details which might be interesting, like there is a black-skinned woman who's heavily pregnant, so probably she escaped execution by pleading that she was pregnant, because this was against the law to execute pregnant women. There is a girl who probably suffers from Down syndrome, so maybe she was abandoned, maybe she was brought by one of the inmates to the prison to be with her mother. We also see the prison keeper and his wife bullying Moll and stealing from her and basically treating her badly. In plate 5, Moll is dying. She contracted syphilis, so probably she was released from prison when it became obvious that she was dying from the venereal disease. She has had a child now, so we have this little boy neglected, playing by the fire, playing with fire, so put in danger, trying to catch some lice in his hair, so neglected and dirty and mistreated. We have 2 doctors quarreling over what kind of cure to administer to the poor woman who is wrapped in blankets and sheets, and she's dying anyway, and one of her servants is trying to steal some of her possessions from her chest. And the last plate shows Moll's funeral, and the people who knew her come to pay their last respects. And of course they do not respect her. They don't care. They go about their daily business. Some of their friends are probably prostitutes trying to flirt with potential clients. Some of the women actually use the coffin lid as a table on which to put some wine or spirits. So they don't care. The inscription on the coffin says that she died aged 23, so she was a very young woman. Her child is left neglected, sitting at the foot of the coffin, probably bound to die, or at least bound to misery. So here we have this whole story of a very sad life of an innocent girl who is lured into prostitution, who loses her morality, who loses her health, who loses her life in the end, and all at the age of 23. But if we look at the way that the story is told, it's not a religious sermon. It's not all doom and gloom. There were funny moments on the way. There were those animals that made the little commentary. There were some funny bits like the commotion when she caused havoc in the house of the merchant. There were some stylistic jokes as well. So some of the images were inspired formally by religious painting, like the first one with Moll coming to London looks like the classical image of the Visitation. So the young Virgin Mary visiting her aunt, Saint Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist. And the moment when Moll is arrested, it looks like it's some sort of joke on the theme of the Annunciation. So the Virgin Mary and the ray of light announcing to her that she will have a baby Jesus. Maybe this is the moment when she discovers that she's pregnant, and this was one of the reasons that she could have been released from prison. So we have a lot of humor despite a rather grim subject, and this is something that really made the name of William Hogarth and contributed immensely to his popularity. Let's now look at other cycles.